They quarantined a planet to starve. Humans smuggled food through the blockade. HFY Stories, the planet Solara had once been a jewel in the galaxy. Known for its lush fields and vast farmlands, it provided food not only for itself but for neighboring systems. Its people, the Solarians, had mastered the art of agriculture, growing crops that could survive in harsh environments. It was a world of hope, a world of plenty. But that was before the quarantine. The outbreak had started as a small, isolated incident, an alien virus, strange and deadly. The Council, a governing body that oversaw many systems in the galaxy, had reacted swiftly, declaring the planet off-limits. The quarantine was meant to contain the virus, they said. No ships were allowed to land. No supplies could be delivered. No help could be given. At first, the Solarians had hoped the quarantine would be short-lived. But as the months passed, hope began to fade. The virus was contained, but the damage had already been done. Without outside help, the once thriving agricultural industry had collapsed. The fields lay untended. The once bustling market stood empty. And with each passing day, more and more Solarians died from hunger, the virus being just one of the many dangers that now plagued the planet. Above Solara, in the black expanse of space, the blockade had taken its toll. A fleet of council ships circled the planet like vultures. They didn't care about the lives lost below. They didn't care about the slow death that the quarantine had brought. They only cared about control, about power. To them, Solara was a symbol of rebellion, too independent, too self-sufficient for their liking. But there were others who still cared. People who saw the Solarians not as a problem but as victims. Among these people were a group of smugglers, humans who had once lived in the outer colonies, far from the reach of the Council. These smugglers had always been considered outlaws, living in the shadows, breaking the rules of the galaxy's law. But to them, the idea of people suffering, especially when they could do something about it, was unacceptable. Jace Marlowe was the leader of this ragtag group. He was a man of few words but steady resolve. He had lived through the harshest parts of space, smuggling goods to planets that the Council had long forgotten. His crew, a mix of skilled individuals who had their own reasons for defying the Council, followed him without question. They had been through hell and back together and they trusted him. But this mission was different. It was dangerous. It was personal. The message had come in the dead of night, transmitted on a secure frequency. It was a call for help from the Solaran resistance. The message was simple, its urgency clear. Help us. The people are starving. The blockade is killing us. Jace had read the message twice before he shared it with his crew. He knew the risks. He knew that to smuggle food past the Council's blockade would not only be a dangerous mission, it would be a declaration of war. But Jace had seen too many people suffer in silence, too many innocent lives caught in the Council's grip. He wasn't about to stand by and watch another planet starve. His crew had gathered in the briefing room of their ship, the Nomad, a battered but reliable vessel. The hum of the engine filled the room as Jace stood before them. His eyes were cold, but there was a fire behind them, a fire that no one could ignore. "We're going to Solara," he said, his voice low and steady. "We're going to break the blockade and get food to the people. They're dying out there, and we're the only ones who can help." Mara, his second-in-command, crossed her arms. She was a woman of sharp intellect, always calculating every move before acting. She had been with Jace for years, and she knew how he thought, how he operated. "The Council won't just let us through, Jace," she said, her voice tinged with caution. "This isn't a simple mission. They'll be watching for anyone trying to break the blockade." Jace nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "I know. But we're not going to walk in through the front door. We'll use the back routes, the old trade lanes. They won't be expecting that. We'll make it through." Elias, the ship's tech expert, tapped at a console in the corner. His fingers moved quickly over the keys as he scanned the information Jace had provided. I can jam their sensors and scramble our signature, Elias said without looking up. It won't be perfect, but it will buy us some time. We'll need more than time, Elias, Mara interjected. We'll need a plan for what happens if they catch us. If they fire on us, we'll be sitting ducks. Jace walked over to the star chart displayed on the wall. I'm not planning on getting caught. We'll go around the asteroid field first. If we're spotted, we'll dive straight into the gravity well. They won't follow us there. Mara raised an eyebrow. The gravity well, that's risky, Jace. It could tear the ship apart. If we do it right, we'll be fine, Jace said with a determined smile. We've pulled off worse. Elias glanced up from his console. You really think we can do this? I mean, we're talking about a council fleet, not a couple of patrol ships. If we're caught, we won't be able to outrun them. We don't need to outrun them, Jace replied. We just need to get to Solara and we'll do whatever it takes. There was a long silence in the room. The crew knew what this mission meant. If they failed, they wouldn't just be imprisoned. They'd be hunted. But if they succeeded, if they could get past the blockade, they would save countless lives. Mara finally nodded. All right, Jace, let's do it. Elias gave a small, almost reluctant smile. Guess we're going to make history. Jace looked at each of them in turn, his eyes filled with a quiet pride. We're not just doing this for Solara. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. It's what we do best. The crew began to prepare. They worked quickly, securing the supplies they'd need for the journey, food, medicine, and a handful of weapons just in case. There was no telling what they would encounter on the way. The blockade had to be broken, and they were the ones who would do it. As the Nomad powered up and left the space station, Jace stood at the helm, watching the distant stars as they slipped past. The weight of what lay ahead was heavy, but there was no turning back. Solara was a dying world. The people were waiting, hoping for someone to help them, for someone to break the chains that had been placed around them. Jace knew that he and his crew were that hope. They would succeed. They had to. The stars were distant and cold as the Nomad sliced through the black expanse of space. Jace Marlowe stood at the helm, his fingers lightly tracing the ship's controls. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, the gravity of what they were about to attempt. No one had ever tried to break the Council's blockade around Solara. It was considered impossible, too risky, too dangerous. But Jace wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. The crew was scattered around the ship, each member absorbed in their preparations. Mara, his second-in-command, stood by the communications station, reviewing the latest intelligence reports. She was quiet, her face focused, but Jace could tell she was worried. The plan they had made wasn't foolproof. It was going to be difficult, maybe even impossible, but Mara trusted him, and that was enough. Elias, the tech expert, was hunched over a terminal in the back of the ship. He was muttering to himself, tapping at the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. Elias had been with Jace for years, and his skills with electronics were unmatched. But even he was nervous about this mission. The Council's sensors were powerful. They would be watching for any irregularities. If Elias couldn't find a way to keep their ship off their radar, they wouldn't stand a chance. Jace turned his attention back to the view outside the ship. The vastness of space stretched out before him, cold and empty. It was hard to imagine that just beyond the stars, a planet was dying. Solara had once been a beacon of life, of abundance. Now it was a world of desolation, a place where hope was fading with every passing day. They had less than a day to get to the outer rim of the blockade, where they would make their first attempt to sneak past the Council ships. Once they reached that point, the real danger would begin. The Council didn't just patrol the borders of Solara's orbit, they had eyes everywhere. Their ships, their sensors, their networks were all connected. Jace's crew would have to be perfect. One mistake and it would all be over. Mara approached Jace, her footsteps quiet on the metal floor of the ship. She stood next to him, her voice low but firm. "We need to talk about the plan again," she said. We've been over it a dozen times, but it's not enough. We can't afford any mistakes. Jace nodded, looking at her. I know, that's why I'm thinking we need to make a few adjustments. Mara raised an eyebrow. Adjustments? Yeah, we're going to need to be more flexible, Jace said. The council will expect us to follow a specific path. We can't do that. We need to keep them guessing, keep them off balance. Mara shook her head slightly. I don't like it. It's already risky enough as it is. I know, Jace said, his voice softer, but we don't have a choice. If we stick to the plan as it is, we're predictable, and when they catch on to that, they'll catch us. There was a moment of silence as Mara considered his words. Finally, she nodded, her expression serious. You're right, we can't afford to be predictable. But we need to be careful. One wrong move and it's all over. Jace looked out at the stars again. I know, but we've got something they don't. We've got the element of surprise. The council is used to dealing with well-planned attacks. They're not used to dealing with people who don't play by the rules. Mara didn't respond immediately. She was thinking, weighing the risks in her mind. Finally, she spoke again. What's our first move? Jace turned to face her. We'll take the hidden routes, the old trade lanes. They're not heavily patrolled, but they'll be risky. There are a lot of hazards in those areas, asteroid fields, debris from old battles, gravitational anomalies. It's dangerous, but it's the best chance we have. Elia's voice came over the comm system. I've got the cloaking device ready, he said. It's not perfect, but it should keep us under the radar long enough to make it past the first wave. Jace smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Good, keep working on that. We'll need all the help we can get. The next few hours were filled with preparations. The Nomad hummed as the crew went about their work, each member focused on their task. Jace checked the coordinates for the hidden routes one more time. There were risks at every turn, but they didn't have any other options. If they didn't make it through the blockade, the Solarians would be left to starve. The council wouldn't lift the quarantine, not unless someone forced their hand. Elias emerged from the back of the ship, wiping his hands on a cloth. Cloaking system is ready to go. But we'll need to hit those trade routes fast. If we linger too long, they'll catch us. Jace nodded. We're going to move fast, all right. Once we hit the trade lanes, we don't stop for anything. No shortcuts, no detours, straight through. Mara stepped forward. And if we're spotted, we'll have to deal with that when it happens, Jace said. But I'm betting on Elias to keep us hidden long enough to make it through. I'll do my best, Elias replied, though the unease in his voice was clear. The crew gathered at the cockpit, the ship's control room. The stars outside were starting to blur as they picked up speed, moving toward the first obstacle. The tension was thick in the air, and Jace could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. Every choice they made from here on out could mean the difference between life and death, but he had a plan. He trusted his crew, and he believed they could pull it off. The Nomad entered the outer rim of the blockade's territory, and Jace's heart began to race. This was it. They were close. The next few hours would decide everything. Let's get ready, Jace said, his voice steady. Stay sharp. We'll hit the first trade lane in 15 minutes. Mara checked her weapons, ensuring everything was in order. Elias ran through the cloaking system one last time, his fingers flying over the console. There was no room for error. If they were detected now, they wouldn't stand a chance. The ship turned, its path leading into the narrow, winding trade lanes that cut through the asteroid field. Jace's hands tightened around the controls as he navigated through the debris, the ship skimming dangerously close to massive rocks. Each turn was a gamble. A single miscalculation could send them careening into an asteroid or into the grasp of a council patrol ship. Keep it steady, Jace, Mara said from behind him. We're almost there. The comm system crackled, and Elia's voice came through again. Cloaking device is activated. We're invisible for now, but we're not out of the woods yet. Jace nodded, his gaze locked on the twisting path ahead. The trade lanes were a maze, a labyrinth of rock and dust that only the most skilled pilots could navigate. He was one of those pilots, but even he knew that this was pushing the limits of what anyone could do. "Stay focused," he muttered to himself. "Stay sharp." And then, the Nomad plunged into the heart of the trade lanes, the shadows of the asteroids swallowing them whole. The Nomad moved quietly through the narrow trade lanes, its engines humming softly as it glided past the jagged rocks and floating debris. The asteroid field ahead was dense, a maze of sharp-edged stones and dust clouds, but Jace was a skilled pilot. His hands moved with steady precision over the controls, guiding the ship through the winding passages with careful ease. The ship's cloaking device hummed, masking them from the eyes of any nearby council ships. For now, they were invisible. Mara stood by the comm station, her eyes scanning the sensors for any signs of movement. Elias sat at the back of the ship, his fingers flying across the console as he kept an eye on the ship's systems. The air in the cockpit was thick with tension. Jace could feel it pressing down on him. Every second counted. They had to make it through the trade lanes and reach Solara's orbit before anyone noticed them. "How's it looking, Elias?" Jace asked, his voice low but steady. Elias didn't look up from his console. "Cloaking system is stable. I've adjusted our frequencies so the Council's ships won't detect us, but we can't stay invisible forever. The more we push the systems, the more power it'll drain," Jace nodded. "We don't have forever. Just get us through the next 10 minutes." The Nomad cut through the dense cloud of asteroids, moving with silent speed. Jace's eyes were focused on the view outside, constantly checking the trajectory, his mind working at full speed. They had to make it to the next waypoint, a narrow opening in the asteroid field that would lead them closer to Solara's orbit. It wasn't a safe route by any means, but it was the fastest. Mara spoke up. "We're almost there, but we've got to be careful. If we go too fast, we'll attract attention. If we go too slow, we'll get caught in a gravitational pull." "I know," Jace replied. "Stay sharp, everyone." The ship swerved suddenly as Jace dodged a massive chunk of asteroid that came out of nowhere. He cursed under his breath but kept the ship on course. His hands were steady, but inside his heart was pounding. This was it. One wrong move and they'd be exposed. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Elias spoke again, his voice tense. "There's a patrol ship ahead. A small one, but it's coming in fast. They must be monitoring this route." Jace didn't hesitate. "Evasive maneuvers. Elias, keep us cloaked. We can't afford to be seen." The ship jerked as Jace yanked the controls, sending the Nomad into a sharp dive. The asteroid field blurred around them as he twisted the ship through the narrow gaps, trying to avoid detection. His heart raced. The patrol ship was closing in fast. If they were spotted now, it was over. "Hold on," Jace shouted as the ship veered hard left, narrowly avoiding a cluster of asteroids. Elias' voice crackled through the comms. "I've jammed their sensors, but it won't last long. They'll start scanning the area manually if they don't find us soon." Jace's eyes flicked to the readout. The patrol ship was getting closer. He had to make a choice, take the risk of staying in the asteroid field and hope they wouldn't be spotted, or break out into open space where they could be seen by other ships. Neither option was ideal, but there wasn't much time to decide. "Go for the opening," Jace decided. "We need to make a clean break." He pushed the throttle forward and the Nomad surged ahead, blasting through the asteroid field toward the narrow gap in the rocks. It was a tight fit. The ship scraped against the edges of the asteroids, sending sparks flying, but Jace kept his grip steady on the controls. He wasn't going to let them fail now. Behind him, Mara's voice was steady, but he could hear the tension in it. "If we make it through this, we'll need to find a way to lose the patrol ship before we hit Solara's orbit." Jace didn't answer. He didn't have time. The gap in the asteroid field was getting closer, and he focused all his attention on the path ahead. The opening was barely wide enough for the Nomad to fit through, but Jace had flown through tighter spaces in the past. His breath was steady, and his mind was calm. He had to trust his instincts now. With a final surge of speed, the Nomad shot through the gap, narrowly missing a large asteroid that would have destroyed them. The ship blasted into open space, and for a brief moment they were free. Elias let out a breath. That was too close. We're out of the asteroid field, but we've got to move fast. The patrol ship is still on our tail. Jace didn't waste a second. He spun the ship hard to the right, diving deeper into space, away from Solara's orbit. We can't outrun them in a straight line. We'll have to outsmart them. He activated the ship's auxiliary thrusters, sending them into a series of quick, sharp maneuvers. He used the ship's sensors to track the patrol ship's movements, anticipating their next move. The Nomad wove in and out of asteroid debris, darting through space like a shadow. The patrol ship followed, but it was slower, less agile than the Nomad. "How's the cloaking?" Jace asked, his voice low but urgent. Elias' fingers moved rapidly over the console. "It's holding, but just barely. They're closing in. If they get too close, they'll lock onto us." Jace's mind raced as he searched for a way out. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. His eyes scanned the surroundings. There was a small moon nearby, barely detectable on the sensors. It wasn't on their flight path, but it might be their only chance to lose the patrol ship. He turned to Mara. "Get ready. We're going to use the moon for cover." Mara nodded, her face tense with focus. She knew what this meant. If they were going to hide, they would have to cut all power to the ship's engines temporarily to avoid detection. It was a risky move, one that could leave them sitting ducks if the patrol ship found them too quickly. Jace guided the Nomad toward the moon, slamming on the controls to change course. The patrol ship was closing in fast, but they weren't going to make it easy. The Nomad cut its engines just as they entered the shadow of the moon, drifting silently along its dark surface. "Now," Jace barked. Elias deactivated the ship's power systems and everything went quiet. For a moment, there was no sound but the steady hum of the ship's internal systems. The Nomad drifted, hidden in the shadow of the moon, its engines cold and silent. If they could stay still long enough, the patrol ship might pass right by them. Jace held his breath as the minutes stretched on, his eyes locked on the sensor readings. The patrol ship was close now, too close. He could see it on the radar, searching, probing the empty space around them. It came closer, closer, and then it passed. Jace let out a quiet sigh of relief. "We did it. We're safe. For now." Elias restarted the power systems and the ship's engines hummed back to life. But the danger wasn't over. They had made it past the patrol ship, but there were still other obstacles ahead. The blockade was still in full force and Solara was not far off. "That was too close," Mara said, her voice tight. "But we're not done yet. We've got a long way to go." Jace nodded, his eyes on the stars ahead. "We've come this far. We're not turning back now." The Nomad pushed forward, moving closer to Solara's orbit. The mission was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward breaking the blockade. And for the people of Solara, that was enough. For now. The Nomad surged forward through space, its engines humming steadily as it moved closer to Solara's orbit. The crew had barely escaped the patrol ship, and though they were safe for the moment, Jace knew they weren't out of danger yet. The hardest part of their mission was still ahead, the final approach to the planet, where the full might of the Council's blockade awaited them. Jace sat in the cockpit, his eyes scanning the vastness of space ahead. The stars seemed distant and cold, a reminder of how alone they were in this mission. They had no backup, no allies. It was just them, against the Council's vast network of ships and sensors. His hands gripped the controls as he focused on the path ahead. They had to be perfect. One mistake, and everything they had worked for would fall apart. Mara was at the communications station, her eyes flicking over the data coming in. The closer they got to Solara, the more active the Council's ships became. The system was locked down tighter than ever, and it seemed that every few minutes, another ship joined the patrol. If they were spotted now, there was no way they'd make it past the blockade. "We're almost there," Mara said, her voice tight with tension. "But the Council's tightening the net. We've got to be careful." Jace nodded, his eyes fixed on the monitor. They were now on the outer edge of Solara's orbit, just a few more light-years away from their destination. But the closer they got, the more exposed they would be. It was a dangerous game. They couldn't afford to take any chances now. Elias, the tech expert, was working furiously at his console in the back of the ship. His fingers flew across the keys as he monitored the ship's systems and tried to stay one step ahead of the Council's sensors. "Cloaking system is holding, but just barely," Elias said, his voice strained. "We'll be visible soon. We need to make it to Solara's atmosphere before they get a lock on us." Jace's mind raced as he thought about their options. He knew they couldn't outrun the Council. They had to rely on stealth. The cloaking system had done its job so far, but it wouldn't hold up much longer. They had to move quickly. "We need to hit the atmosphere at full speed," Jace said, his voice calm despite the pressure building inside him. "Once we're in, the sensors won't be able to track us as easily, but we can't be seen before that." The crew fell silent as they prepared for the next phase of the mission. The ship was about to enter a dangerous zone, where every move had to be precise. If they entered the atmosphere too early, the Council's ships would detect them. If they waited too long, they risked being caught outside the planet's atmosphere, where there would be no way to escape. Elias gave a quick nod. "I'll keep the sensors scrambled, but once we enter, we'll have to go dark. No power, no transmissions, nothing." Jace glanced over at Mara, who was still monitoring the comms. "How are the resistance groups on the ground?" he asked. "They're ready," Mara replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. "They're waiting for the supplies, but we need to get them through the atmosphere first. After that, they'll take care of the rest." Jace took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. This was it, the final stretch. If they succeeded, the people of Solara would have food, medicine, and a chance to survive. But if they failed, Jace didn't want to think about what would happen if they failed. "Get ready," he said. "We're making our move in 5 minutes." The ship's hull shuddered as the Nomad adjusted course, moving into position. They were nearing the planet's atmosphere, the thin layer of air that would protect them from detection. The cloaking system was running at full capacity, but Jace knew it wouldn't last. He had to make sure they entered the atmosphere at the right moment, or they would be spotted by the Council's fleet. "Elias," Jace said, his voice steady but urgent. "I need you to keep the cloaking steady. Don't let it flicker. We're almost there." Elias didn't respond right away, his attention fixed on the console in front of him. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, his fingers moving faster. "I'm on it," he said finally. "But it's going to be close. We won't have much time once we hit the atmosphere." Jace's eyes flicked to the timer on the console. Time was slipping away faster than he liked. "Everyone brace for impact," he said. "We're going in." The ship's engines roared as the Nomad accelerated, plunging toward the planet's atmosphere. The feeling of weightlessness was replaced by the intense pressure as the ship entered the lower layers of the atmosphere. The air outside the ship began to burn with friction, and Jace could feel the heat rising around them. It was like flying through fire. Mara's voice came over the comms. "We're entering the zone. Get ready." Elias muttered under his breath, tapping at the console. "I'm still keeping the cloaking stable, but it's draining power. We need to get through this fast." The ship shuddered again as it pushed deeper into the atmosphere. Jace's hands gripped the controls, guiding the ship through the fiery layers of air. Every moment felt like a lifetime. They were close now. Just a little further and they would be free of the Council's grasp. Outside the window, the sky was a deep, fiery red, and the planet's surface was a blur of colors as the Nomad sliced through the clouds. Jace had flown through planet-side atmospheres before, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now. The pressure was greater. "Almost there," Mara said, her voice tight. "We've got to drop low to avoid detection. Stay low until we hit the surface." Jace nodded, his mind working quickly. They were getting close to the point of no return. If they didn't make it through now, the mission would be over and the people of Solara would be lost. But if they did, they'd make history. They'd show the galaxy that humanity could do what others thought impossible. "Elias, any word from the Resistance?" Jace asked, his voice steady but anxious. "They're waiting," Elias replied. "They know we're coming, but we have to make it through first. No one can help us once we hit the surface." Jace's hands tightened on the controls. The Nomad was shaking now, the ship's hull groaning under the pressure as they entered the denser layers of the atmosphere. He could feel the heat rising, the ship's system straining under the intense friction. But they couldn't slow down now. "We're almost there," Jace said. "Hang on tight." The ship plunged lower, the heat increasing with every second. The ground was getting closer. Jace's heart raced in his chest. He had been in tight situations before, but this was different. This was about more than just getting through a blockade. It was about saving lives. Just as they were about to enter the final stretch, a loud alarm blared through the ship. The cloaking system had failed. The Nomad was no longer invisible. Jace's heart skipped a beat. They were exposed. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. "Elias, what happened?" "Power's drained," Elias said quickly. "I'm trying to restore the system, but it's going to take time." The ship's sensors beeped wildly as the Council's ships appeared on the radar. The blockade had detected them. "Mara, I need you to prep the weapons," Jace ordered, his voice sharp. "We're not running anymore." Jace's heart pounded as he prepared for the worst. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still to come. They weren't out of danger yet. The alarm blared again, louder this time. The Nomad was no longer hidden. The Council's ships had found them. Jace's fingers tightened on the controls as he fought to keep the ship steady. They were in the atmosphere now, but the pressure was mounting. Every second counted. "Damn it," Jace muttered, his voice tight with frustration. He glanced over at Elias, who was working furiously at his console. The cloaking system had failed, and now they were exposed. "We've been detected," Elias said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "We have no time left. They're already locking onto us." Jace's mind raced. They were so close to delivering the food, the medicine, and the supplies to the people of Solara. But now, with the Council's ships closing in, their chances of success were slipping away. He couldn't let that happen. "Mara," Jace said, his voice sharp. "Get ready to fire up the weapons. We're not just running anymore." Mara nodded, her face set in a determined expression as she moved toward the weapons controls. "I've got it covered," she said. "We just need to make sure we're not sitting ducks." Jace's eyes flicked to the monitor. The Council's fleet was coming closer, closing in from all directions. Their ships were larger, more heavily armed. The Nomad was smaller, faster, but it was vulnerable. They couldn't outrun them anymore. The only choice was to fight. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Jace ordered. "Elias, keep the sensors scrambled. We need every advantage we can get." Elias' fingers danced over the console, his eyes scanning the ship systems. "I'm trying, Jace," he said. "But their ships are scanning every inch of space around us. It's only a matter of time before they lock onto our location." The tension in the cockpit was unbearable. Jace could feel it in his chest, the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just about smuggling supplies anymore. It was about defying an oppressive force, about showing the galaxy that they wouldn't be bullied into submission. He couldn't let the Council win. Mara's voice cut through the silence. "We've got incoming. One of their ships is closing fast. They're preparing to fire." Jace's heart raced. They couldn't take a hit like that. The Nomad was sturdy, but it wasn't built for direct combat. It was a smuggler's ship, not a warship. They needed to be smart, fast, and unpredictable. He gripped the controls tighter, his mind working quickly. "Evasive action now," Jace barked. He slammed the controls to the right, sending the Nomad into a sharp roll. The ship jerked violently as it spun, narrowly avoiding the laser fire from the Council ship. Jace's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. He kept the ship moving, twisting and turning, using every trick he knew to avoid the blasts. The Council ship fired again, but this time Mara was ready. She unleashed a barrage of countermeasures, firing a series of pulse blasts that scrambled the Council ship's targeting systems. "Nice shot," Jace said, gritting his teeth as the ship pulled out of the roll. Mara's lips curled into a tight smile. "We've got more where that came from." The Council ship was still on their tail, but they had a brief moment to breathe. Jace knew it wouldn't last. They were running out of time. "Elias, we need to get to the surface," Jace said, his voice urgent. "Now. Do whatever you can to keep us off their radar." Elias nodded without speaking, his fingers moving swiftly over the console. The ship's cloaking device was down, but Elias was still trying to scramble their energy signature, buying them just a few seconds of freedom. The Nomad was low on power, but Elias was doing his best to make it work. "We're close," Elias said, his voice tight. "I'm diverting power to the engines. It's risky, but it should give us enough speed to break through." Jace didn't waste any time. He pushed the ship into full throttle, heading straight for the planet below. The surface of Solara was just visible through the thick clouds of the atmosphere. The ground seemed so far away, but they were moving fast. Too fast. "We need to make it to the drop zone," Jace said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "The Resistance is waiting there. They can take care of the supplies once we land." Mara was at the communications station, her eyes scanning the signals. "I'm trying to reach them," she said, "but the Council is jamming everything. We'll have to land blind." "We don't have a choice," Jace said, his grip firm on the controls. "We're going in." The Nomad surged forward, slicing through the atmosphere as the ground below rushed toward them. The ship's hull groaned under the strain, but Jace kept his focus. He had to land. There was no other option. The Council ships were still in pursuit, their lasers cutting through the clouds, lighting up the sky. The Nomad shuddered as a blast struck its side, causing the ship to lurch violently. Jace gritted his teeth, trying to keep the ship steady. He could feel the strain on the ship, but he wasn't about to give up now. "Hold on," Jace shouted, pulling the controls hard to the left to avoid another blast. The ship swerved dangerously, but he kept it on course. The ground was getting closer, closer than Jace had hoped. He could see the outlines of the Resistance waiting near the drop zone, their makeshift landing site barely visible through the storm clouds. The Nomad was running low on power, and every second felt like a lifetime. "We're almost there," Jace said, his voice rising with the urgency of the moment. "Get ready to jump, Mara. Elias, I need full power to the landing thrusters." Elias was already working, his face tense with concentration. "I've got it, power, being diverted to the thrusters." Jace's heart raced as the ground rushed up to meet them. The Nomad shook again as another blast struck its rear, sending a sharp pain through the ship. But they were almost there. The landing site was just a few hundred yards away. "Steady," Jace muttered to himself, guiding the ship toward the makeshift runway. His hands were shaking now, but he couldn't afford to make a mistake. This was their last chance. The Nomad touched down with a violent jolt, the landing gear scraping against the rough surface of Solara's ground. The ship skidded to a halt, throwing up a cloud of dust and debris. The engines sputtered and died, and the ship came to a complete stop. "We made it," Mara said, her voice filled with disbelief. "We actually made it." Jace slumped in his seat, exhaustion flooding through him. He could hear the sound of the Resistance moving toward them, ready to unload the supplies. The mission was a success. They had made it past the blockade, delivered the supplies, and saved countless lives. But the fight wasn't over. Jace knew that. The Council would come after them. The Nomad was grounded, but they had done what they set out to do. They had broken the blockade. Jace looked over at his crew, his eyes filled with pride. "We did it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Mara smiled, her expression tired but satisfied. "Yeah, we did." The Nomad had made it through the blockade. The mission was a success, but the fight for Solara was just beginning.